Hi, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Yeshiva League Pass Face-off. I'm your host, Josh Cass, and we're sponsored by the Weiselberg Law Firm. For 16 years, you've entrusted Elliot with the growth and guidance of your kids, and now it's time to let him do the same for your family's most important asset, your home. Admitted in both New York and New Jersey, Elliot can help guide you through any residential or commercial purchase, sale, refinance, or lease with championship quality and award-winning care. If you're looking for your new home, or if you're looking for your commercial coach, your new home is your goal, reach out to the Weiselberg Law Real Estate Services today at 917-952-2597 or at wiselawesque@gmail.com. Reminding everyone, all of our viewers, once again, that's the Weiselberg Law Firm. Please choose wisely. Once again, Elliot, welcome back. For those of you that are seeing this episode, you've probably already seen the varsity predictions episode amongst what we thought was going to happen in the playoffs. That episode featured Avidan Berman, the coach of the Flatbush Falcons, whose varsity team didn't qualify for the playoffs. And he was an outstanding source, brought a lot of great insight. But his JV team is in the playoffs, and that hints to what we're doing today. We're talking about the JV postseason, the playoff picture, giving our predictions. No better guy to bring in other than Elliot again for this. So, Elliot, welcome back. And I'm just about ready to go. How about you?
Always happy to be a part. I can't believe we're down to playoff time. It seems like the season just started yesterday.
Yeah, I mean, they say time flies when you're having fun. And I, as a coach, my teams haven't qualified for the playoffs. But that being said, a lot of fun to be in the moment during the season with them. And now postseason, while my team's not in it, there's a lot for me to be taken care of right now amongst matchups in the leagues. Tonight was the playoff game in varsity amongst TBC and Kushner. I was there scouting that out, and really excited now to talk some JV playoff hockey here, as we have a couple of very interesting matchups coming our way and very fast. At the time of recording this, it's Tuesday night. The first playoff game in the JV postseason is Thursday night. And I think that before we just get into that real quick, why don't we just let our viewers know who's qualified so far for the postseason in the Junior Varsity League?
So there were 6 teams that qualified. Unlike last year and unlike the year before, the way this worked was that the top 2 teams, the one and one from the East and the West, each received the top 2 seeds and a first round bye. And then the next 4 wild card teams, which means the best points from everybody combined, made the playoffs. So it didn't matter whether you were in the East and the West. It just happened to work out that we had an even split of 3 teams from the East and the West make it. The 1 was TABC, who finished their season with 20 points at 10-0. The 2, DRS, finished their season 9-1, 18 points. That 1 loss to TABC, which I'm sure we'll cover at some point in this episode. And then we get to the first round matchups that fall in behind. The 3 seed SAR, 8-2, 16 points. The 4 seed North Shore, 7-2, 0-1, 15 points. Those 2 teams were hosting or will be hosting the first round games. And the 2 teams that will be on the road, the number 5 seed MTA at 6-3-1, 13 points. Flatbush falling in behind them at 6-4 with 12 points.
Yeah. So as you mentioned, 6 teams made it in. It happened to work out that there were 4 wildcards, but it turned out that there was an even split, similar to the way varsity just happened to have 2 extra wildcards making it in. But again, you saw a 4-4 split. Avidan Berman and I broke that down in the varsity predictions episode. But here we're talking JV. As you mentioned, we've got the SAR Sting and North Shore Lions. They've now changed their name to the Lions, hosting. And that means that, for the matchup that we'll be talking about first, it's the first one coming up, which is on Thursday night at North Shore. They're hosting the Lions. So it's Lions on Lions, North Shore against MTA. Elliot, just real quick, I faced both of these teams during the regular season, and let me just tell you, they play 2 completely different styles of hockey. You're not going to see a ton of speed necessarily in MTA's game, but you're going to see a lot of speed in North Shore's game. That being said, you're not going to see a lot of possession and fundamental play really in North Shore's game. They're going to try to let their skill take advantage with the personnel they have rather than MTA, who are all about making those just making the good fundamental play and just playing hard and, not necessarily going with their skill, but, playing to their strengths. My question to you is what really separates these two teams? They're just about even in terms of a record. One only has one more win than the other. And they play, they both didn't exactly have the strongest of schedules. That being said, they played well against the teams that you would have expected them to play well against. And now you basically have, if you ask me, a matchup of this team versus themselves in the other division.
Well, I mean, if you look at the schedule they did play over the season, they didn't quite get there only by just sliding into a spot. They were each very worthy of the spot that they took, and you can see that in the matchups that they both in the key matchups that they both played. We can start out in the East with the North Shore Lions. Played DRS fairly close the first time, I guess as close as one could in the East, closer than anybody in the East did this entire season. That 4-1 loss on what I believe was DRS's opening night. In the time since, they did what they needed to do. They beat Flatbush, although the return game a couple of days later in Flatbush was not quite to North Shore's advantage. But they did finish with a record of 7-2-1. I mean, they took out, like I said, Flatbush. They were close with DRS the first time. They didn't get there just by chance. They got there because they were better. They played better than the rest of the East. Going to MTA sort of threw a curveball in what I don't want to say expected to happen, but what we thought might happen. Remember the last time you and I were on, we were talking about the possibility of having two in-division matchups. In where Flatbush would probably end up going to North Shore and MTA would end up going to SAR just because of how we thought the records may fall out. And then MTA went and trounced Story Yisroel and played a very close game against Frisch that could have actually seen them potentially go on and host this game instead of North Shore. MTA over the last few weeks has sort of turned it on. And I think that's what's going to make this a very interesting matchup. You said it correctly. These are two teams that very much mirror each other. They're going to be playing in the big gym, and it's going to be a question of, I would think, who has the better overall unit as opposed to just the best players or the players that are playing the hottest right now. Because once you get to the playoff time, everybody is on even footing, and it's on you to, as we saw tonight in the Kushner TABC game, you could be the 1 seed, you could be the 8 seed, and the difference between is one goal.
Right. Again, we're going to be moving on with this. Just to put it to prediction, I think that we've pretty much broken it down as best as we can without going into all the personnel, because if we did that, it would take forever. But I think that it should be noted that you mentioned this game is going to be played in North Shore. And I think that favors North Shore in terms of the way their play style is and the way they know how to play in their own gym. If you look at their record, I'm not telling you they're a bad team on the road, but they know that gym better than anyone. There are certain ways they like to play when it comes to playing in their own gym because their players are used to running that court the entire time. I mentioned how, there's a lot of speed involved in their game because of the fact that they're used to having to outrun their opponents in that gym. It's the biggest gym, I think, surface play-wise in the entire Yeshiva League. Bigger than Frisch, bigger than TABC, than Hafter, anywhere. And at the end of the day, I think that comes into favor them a little bit more. What makes it interesting for me is the fact that I'm looking at both these teams and I'm saying they're pretty even on paper when it comes to the field players. The goaltending, I think, is really what could decide this. And if you ask me, I think that I have to give North Shore the edge there. Ryan Stolwark was not a goaltender in Yeshiva League last year. And I heard the story that without him playing goalie, they would not have had a Yeshiva League JV hockey team. But because he played goalie, he kind of gave them a chance. And he's been outstanding this season for what he's had to come and do. And I think if you ask me, I have to give the nod to North Shore. That being said, I think what MTA should look to take advantage of is the fact that if you look at their goalie, Ozzie Dreyfus, who is coming out of YCQ, a team that didn't have a lot of success last year in middle school, he's done a good job standing up for what he's had to adjust to. And I think that even if you're going to look and say that North Shore has the better of the two goaltenders in this matchup, the space might allow, while it might allow North Shore's players more room to operate, might also allow for less shots potentially on Dreyfus and letting MTA's defense try to take control if they can get acclimated to that in a timely manner.
So just taking all that and just adding to what you've said, going through the regular season, North Shore's success at home has been astounding. And the only blemish on that home record was a loss to DRS, a team with the most similar court to theirs. You are correct. North Shore is the biggest gym area-wise. DRS is right behind it. Ironically, the two gyms are very similar to each other in makeup. So to play in a gym like that and to do what they've done, and for Ryan Stallwork to have the season he's had, and if you take a look at that, outside the two DRS games,
he's been money.
He's only the most goals he's given up, or the most goals given up by North Shore, have been in blowout wins. So an 8-3 win over YDE and a 6-3 win over Orius. Other than that, 2 to Flatbush in overtime, 3 shutouts. I think that it's fairly plain to see who the engine for North Shore has been on the back end. And when you have players like Elijah Kuehl, Benjamin Muller on the front end, I think that makes for a very winning recipe. And I think for MTA, despite the way they've been playing to this point, I don't know that they're going to be able to acclimate themselves to that much space in time to be able to take advantage of it. The game against Frisch was at home, where they played well. If you take a look at the big gyms that they've played in, well, they really only played the only big gym they've really played in was TABC. So I guess that's kind of a hard comparison to make, but they really haven't played in a big gym before. So this is going to be a bigger test for them, knowing that they really haven't played in a gym with this much space.
Yeah. And so that being said, I think that we'll move on to the second matchup in between the SAR Sting and the Flatbush Falcons. And this is a matchup we've actually already seen during the regular season, both during the regular season and in your preseason tournament. It was the championship matchup. SAR pulled away with, I believe, a 4-1 win there. They played Flatbush during the regular season, and I think in SAR beat them 3-1 in a game that, 3-1's a close score. But SAR didn't pull away until late in that game. That was a tied game.
Very late.
That was a tied game early. I'm looking at this SAR team, and I'm saying they're loaded, and more than the fact that they're loaded, they are loaded with freshmen. This is a team that is predominantly freshmen having the success and the run that they've had. Obviously, the two most important names that are amongst that class on the offensive side of things are Jack Linhart and Nate Zitter, guys who have come from 2 different elementary/middle schools and have really put something special together. And on the back end, obviously, you've got a homegrown talent in Ellie Fenster, who's the brother of multiple Fenster siblings that have done it before. His brother Ari, a varsity player on the SAR Stings, a star. Ellie's not far behind him in terms of where he is as a player. Obviously, I know we talked about the freshman. I don't want to leave Michael Goldman's name out of that. I know that people can talk about him and say, that SAR's a small rink, and you can you might face a lot of shots, but in terms of the space you have to maneuver, they're not coming from a ton of different angles. You kind of get used to it. But he's played very well for what he's had to do, similar to the way it's taken for Ryan Stallwork to get acclimated amongst a system in North Shore. And I think that it wouldn't go without saying that we have to mention some of the veteran players on this team, such as Sammy Glass, Moses Jeter, and Henry Wolf, who have all done fantastic jobs. There are a couple of other names that I'm not going to keep throwing out there. That just proves how loaded this team is. On the opposite end, you've got the Flatbush Falcons, a team that I'm sure our good friend and colleague Avi Don is saying, wow, what do I have to do to combat this SAR team? Because they came close the first time. And obviously the big name on that team, you're looking at Joe Catton, you're looking at Asher Malamed, you're looking at correct me if I'm always like off with the first name, but they have Gindi on that team. There's a Gindi on that team as well. And they all just like, the more names again, but they all just play well together. They play good, hard-nosed, grinding hockey. And a lot of times I know it's SAR playing in the rink that seems to be the advantage. Well, Flatbush plays in a rink too. So my question to you is, this was probably the closest game we've seen all regular season long with SAR, other than two potential statistically close games with DRS. How do you see this one going?
So we talked about how mirroring the first game is going to be. This game is diametric equals in just about every respect, other than the ages, where you have the freshman-laden group at SAR, you have the mostly sophomore-laden group in Flatbush, but that's really where the differences end. Like you said, same style rink. The only difference is that the SAR rink plays a little faster, so the Falcons will have to adjust to that. But I think that if there's one team where that home court advantage is taken away from SAR, it's going to be with Flatbush. And I think that if Flatbush has learned anything from the first two games that they played, it's going to really put a lot of pressure on SAR. Now, SAR has played extremely well over the entire year. Flatbush has had a couple of starts and stops. The DRS games in particular, the North Shore loss and the SAR loss, but the SAR loss was a very close one. We also have to remember that was back very, very early in the middle of November. I think that there are several players on both squads that have sort of changed and matured a bit. I think that there are several players on Flatbush who have very much improved since that SAR game and really gelled as a cohesive unit. Remember, Flatbush did not have a JV squad last year, so this is really their first time together as a unit. But the experience that Joe Catton and that an Ellie Gindi, that an Ashim Alamed had from last year's varsity team really do come into play. And Omri Adaf has played phenomenal over the better stretch of the season. If Omri can stand up to the small gym and can really combat the angles that give most goalies trouble there, I think we're in for a really, really long dogfight. I think that the matchup of Catton versus Linhart on the offensive end is one that's really tantalizing. Something that I think that if you're looking for a star power matchup, it's going to be the two of them, and the game will probably come down to their sticks. Catton and Gindi against, as you said, Linhart and Zitter. That one is very tough to call.
Yeah,
extremely tough. If you have to ask me about where the difference is, I think the question is going to be how Michael Goldman stands up to the test of his first playoff game, really as a freshman in high school. I wonder if after all the time that Flatbush has had to go back and see what SAR has done and how to combat SAR, whether or not this may be a little bit leaning in Flatbush's favor as a result. So while I'm not necessarily predicting an upset, please don't be surprised if this game comes down to overtime, potentially. One goal game with a couple of minutes left. This is one of those that really does have the potential to go the other way than most people might think.
Yeah, and again, I'm going to side with you. I'm going to take SAR here as my pick, but I like them in a close one. Again, wouldn't be surprised to see overtime as a possibility here. And at the same time, I really think that sometimes all you need is one bounce. And if Flatbush can get a bounce, no shots toward anyone on SAR, and I'm not pumping anyone on Flatbush's tires here and saying this, but if you have a guy in SAR like Linhart or like Zitter or on Flatbush, like Gindi, Malamed, or obviously Joey Catton, then sometimes all you need is one bounce and then one play from any player that I've just mentioned, like can turn the tide in that game.
Especially in that gym.
Especially in that gym.
Especially in that gym.
Crazy things happen in that gym over the years. Anyway, that leads us on to the semifinal round. And if our predictions are holding true, then that means we're going to see North Shore going up into TABC and SAR heading into DRS. We'll start with SAR against DRS as that potential matchup. Elliot, who do you like there? Real quick, I think that's a very interesting matchup. However, that being said, the key for me is that SAR, I mentioned, they have veterans on that team, but they are led predominantly by the freshmen. And they're talented, don't get me wrong. They really are. But that DRS team has a very, very good core of sophomores that just went to the championship last year. And again, this game is in DRS. And I know that maybe you could look in some areas and say DRS might have the weaker goaltending, but SAR might have the stronger offense and the stronger depth, potentially maybe a little bit more speed. But I'm looking at this game overall, and I'm saying it's in DRS. They very rarely disappoint, especially in the playoffs when they have an opportunity like this and the experience is there for them. And I think it is. Yitzi Uden's been one of the most dominant players in Yeshiva League this season, if not the most dominant player. Micha Khan's broken out after a very strong ending to his freshman season. And I don't want to take away from guys like Isaac Spector and Jack Greenbaum and Ellis Bornstein, obviously. And I know that, you know, some people are talking about
there's one name you still haven't mentioned.
And Pokris. Like, no, still not. Like, either way, at the end of the day,
or maybe I missed it. But if you haven't mentioned Yitzi Uden's name at this point,
I said at the start of the
sorry.
Yeah, no.
Sorry, it's late and I'm missing things.
Again, with that being said, I'm looking at this DRS team and I'm saying I think that them being a little bit more experienced than SAR is really what's going to take them over the top. And I like DRS in I do like them in a close one though. Not to say I think SAR will be completely blown out of the water if this matchup occurs.
So I'm going to give you two more names to take with you, and I think these are the two players that have been the linchpin of this team offensively over the better part of the last year. I shouldn't say solely offensively, but their work on both the offensive and defensive end has allowed DRS to continue their run. Moshe Aryeh and Ellis Bornstein.
Yeah.
I think that the two of them bring a level of speed and vision that you really don't see from anybody on SAR. I think the fact that this is going to be in a bigger gym with players that are potentially a bit faster and more experienced, with Aryeh, Bornstein, Lampert, the control of Yitzi Uden, and his size and his ability to be a menace down low is going to be very, very tough for SAR to deal with on the defensive end.
Yeah. And again, like I said, this is not something I'd put past SAR to play a close game. And maybe they can even steal it from DRS. I don't know. DRS hasn't seen SAR this season. There's a possibility that, you know, they don't know what to expect. And maybe SAR comes out in the first shift and catches them by surprise. You know, we saw that happen with DRS and Kushner in the semis last year when Kushner was the one that jumped out early. And DRS was scrambling to play from behind and try to find a way back into that game. But again, it's not going to surprise me. While it won't surprise me if SAR plays a close game, I still like DRS to win this game.
Well, let's be fair about it. The deeper team and I don't want to say the team with more stamina, but the team that has had to play in that gym more,
yes,
or that type of gym more this year, it's clearly one-sided.
Yes,
and that's with DRS.
Yeah. And that brings us on to the next matchup, the other semifinal matchup that we're both saying is going to be TABC hosting North Shore. This is an interesting matchup.
Either way, North Shore MTA, I think we can both agree that the likely result is the same.
Yeah, you know, it's going to be, I think it'll be an interesting matchup. I'm curious to see what guys like Benjamin Muller and Elijah Kuehl and how Jacob Baum will play in that TABC gym, a place that allows them to still be able to move around. They've got lots of space, right? That, you know, they don't play direct similar styles of dump and chase, but I think it's something North Shore could get used to. It's something they've been used to defending in their gym because they see it a lot. It's a big part of TABC's game. That being said, I mentioned that North Shore has 3 solid players, just right off the bat in the field. That being said, I'm looking at this TABC team and I'm saying, really, other than Yitzi Uden of DRS, and if you want to throw Jack Linhart's name out there of SAR and Joey Catton's name of Flatbush, that this is the team. And there are some other names that also come borderline. Some players who are either not qualified for the playoffs, their teams didn't make it, or some players, as we know, Avidan and I mentioned, who have moved up to varsity as 10th graders this year, that I'm looking at that TABC sophomore class. And I see the big, bright names of Aiden Rausman, Ben-Sion Kaiser, Aryeh Zikovitz, the transfer star in Ethan Moskoff, and Aryeh Simon. And I say to myself, those 5 guys might be the 5 best players in Yeshiva League. Now, again, we talked about, obviously, last year on the championship broadcast, how TABC was a young team and how all of these names, and Shea Fields and Matas Kraus and Ezra Alter, were better than that offensively of the names that DRS had put out there. And while they might have been, that wasn't the case in the end. DRS won that game. However, I think that for how much experience all of these guys have gotten together, keep in mind, Moskoff, you can maybe take off that list because he wasn't Frisch last year, but I think amongst the other 4 names on that list, or the 5 names on that list, that they all played and got adequate amount of playing time last year as freshmen. They know what they're up against. They know what it takes to win, and they want it more than anything after having lost in the championship last year. I'm going with, I hate to say a no-brainer, but I feel like it has to be a no-brainer that TABC is the favorite in this game.
All respect to everybody on North Shore and MTA, especially Elijah Kuhl, who could make a case for the opposite of what I'm about to say. But the best 4 players on the court at any given time will be from TABC.
Right.
Not even counting goalie.
Yeah.
The best 4 players, no matter who plays in that semifinal game, will be TABC's for whomever is on the floor at the time, pending anything late, where some of the reserve players get a bit of time. And even then, given how deep this TABC team is, one could still say that you'll likely have 1 or 2 who are in contention for the best player on the court at that time. And it just goes to TABC's depth and why they've done what they've done all year. But I think when you're looking at roads to the championship, TABC really should not have competition heading toward the finals.
Yeah. And again, I don't want to take away from anyone on North Shore. I also don't want to take away from any names on TABC I left out. As you mentioned, it just shows how deep that team is. And I think that, especially the coaching staff, Svika Palayev, Josh Friedman, and Yosef Robin, are all looking to correct the mistakes that ended them as runner-ups last year, as opposed to who were initially the favorites to win it all. We'll see where that plays. They'll once again be hosting that game. Whether it's North Shore or MTA, you and I like North Shore to make it to that round. But either way, that brings us on to a projected and predicted final matchup of DRS TABC, a rematch of a game that happened during the regular season on January 1st, New Year's Day. And I hate to say it, we're not really giving North Shore much of a shot against TABC, with no disrespect, obviously. DRS and North Shore played early on in the year in TABC, and I know this game wouldn't be played at TABC.
In DRS.
They played at TABC.
North Shore and
I'm talking about TABC DRS, like championship.
Oh, sorry. I thought you were talking about North Shore DRS. Apologies.
No. North Shore, not North Shore. TABC against DRS happened in TABC this year, and TABC, just to break that game down, TABC took a lead early, and they never gave it back. DRS was down 2-0 at one point, cut it to 2-1, and then TABC scored 2 more goals. The final score ended 4-1 TABC on top. I think that I'm looking at this game, though, and I'm saying, no disrespect to the squad DRS has there. And they've got great players, we've mentioned. But I'm looking at this TABC team, and again, like we're mentioning, they have potentially the top 5 players in the league. Not, again, individually, it only matters if they really play together as one cohesive unit. But with that being said, they are guys that played a big role in last year's championship caliber team for TABC and lost to this team of DRS last year that was predominantly sophomore. And I think they're the players that are the most hungry and that want it the most. I think ultimately speaking, I wouldn't be shocked, obviously, to see DRS pull something out here because statistically they're not the favorite here, but they weren't the favorite last year.
They weren't last year either.
Yeah, so it wouldn't shock me, but in comparison, I say goaltending, they're about even. Defensively, I think I give TABC the edge, and offensively, I think I give TABC the edge too. If they're taking 2 out of 3 categories amongst players on the court, I got to go TABC, and that's who I'd go with. I'd probably predict a closer game than not, obviously. If I were putting an exact prediction on it, I'd say 4-3, 4-2 TABC.
So I'm going to take a step back and say that there's one variable that we do not know at the current moment that could have a little bit of an impact, maybe not as great an impact as I'm making it out to be, but we still do not know where the championship game is going to be played.
Yes, of course. That would be huge for them.
I think that by the time we get to our finals preview, which I'm sure that you, myself, and unless Avidan has pulled off 2 phenomenal victories to that point, Avidan will probably join us as well, breaking down the championship games. I think that where the game is played could have a much bigger impact, much in the way it did last year. Lawrence Middle School is a mirror image of TABC almost. The way the court is set up in terms of the dimensions mimic TABC very well.
Yeah.
Frisch last year was a little more to DRS's liking. And that in and of itself gave DRS a little bit of an edge because of the spacing. And ultimately, I think that's one of the reasons why they were able to do what they did. With the boards being as they were and being able to use their size to move the ball up against a smaller team, the boards played a factor in that the boards were movable, and so were TABC's defensemen. And that played a big role in players like Itzi Uden and Jacob Frankel being able to body their way up and get a little bit of space and to be able to work some space around. If this game is played in a smaller gym, TABC has all the ability in the world to choke that game out, make it a very, very rough night for DRS. If this game is played in a bigger gym where TABC has to spread out, the question is going to be, can TABC play a more spread out game than they're used to? For the most part, they weren't challenged when they went to Frisch. This was a couple of months ago, though. This was back early on in the season. Can DRS come up with a game plan that can make that game a little close if it's in Frisch one more time? That would be interesting. But now the one factor is that all of these players have played in a championship in Frisch before. So can TABC use what they've learned from last year about that gym to help themselves? Yeah. And I think ultimately that will negate a DRS advantage, because even at home, DRS, if you go back to that Frisch game where DRS almost, I don't want to say let the game slip away, but it took a really, really strange bounce in order to get the win against a Frisch team in DRS. I think you're going to see or as you've mentioned, you're going to see a much higher level of competition coming from TABC. And even if it's on a court like what DRS has, like they played against Frisch, and like if they play in Frisch, I question whether or not DRS, with all its depth, has enough to challenge TABC.
Right. Well, it's definitely going to be interesting. Every matchup is going to be interesting. But for now, that's all we have time for. So once again, Elliot, thank you for making it happen. Thank you for joining us once again. And again, really want to thank everyone for tuning into this episode of Yeshiva League Pass Face-off. And once again, thank you to the Weiselberg Law Firm for sponsoring. Once again, that is the Weiselberg Law Firm reminding everyone, choose wisely.